This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, calling the May 18th meeting of the Audit Committee to order. We have a quorum. I see that Mike is on and Tom Flynn is on, and we have all the staff. Oh, and Lonnie is on. So welcome. Good morning, everybody. We have, I think, 6 items on the agenda for this morning. Brian Farnan, I don't know if there's any announcements. Oh, should we take public comment before we get started? Is there any?
Yes, that'd be great.
Public comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the 3rd item on the agenda, which is to approve the meeting minutes for the October 15th, 2020 meeting. Everybody should have, there was a copy of the minutes in the meeting materials on Board Effect. And if anyone has reviewed them, I would take a motion to accept the meeting minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it so you can move forward.
All right, great. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'll abstain from that.
Okay. And okay, so the minutes are adopted. And we'll move on to the 4th item on the agenda, which is an update or the status on the APA audit for FY 2018 and 2019. And I'm going to now turn the substance over to Brian Farnan.
All right. And I actually think we have Jane, who, God bless her soul, is on vacation and joined us for this call. So, and if you are here, I'll actually turn it over to you to do a kind of quick report out.
I don't see her on, Brian.
Oh, okay. Why don't we jump in? Part of my problem is my notes are actually in the meeting minutes, so I'm going to include this. Sorry for this. So our APA audit is complete. There were really, I would say, 3 main findings, and feel free to jump in, anyone, at any time. Brian, if you have any additional color. But I was going to just go through the 3 main ones. The first kind of main was regarding submitting of quarterly financial materials as part of our compliance requirements for the state of Connecticut. This is something that, especially during the transition from George Bellis to Jane, we struggled with. This is going back a couple years. We do have a good handle on this, on submitting these quarterly financial statements to the state. We'll even see later on within this presentation that all of our reporting requirements are up to date. So that was the first finding.
Mr. Farnan, are we now submitting our quarterly reports on a timely basis? Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Okay, so we no longer have this issue.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. I just want to be clear.
Yep. The second one relates to severance payments and the fact that severance agreements were provided to employees, and the period of time between them receiving the severance and them leaving and then returning to their position. But they weren't returning, and this relates to after the sweeps. This issue came about, and there was actually a change in the legislation at the same time that the sweeps were occurring that basically said that certain severance agreements over a certain amount had to go for review. So what we want to do at the end of the day is, we were obviously restructuring the organization, and we had long-term employees who we wanted to offer separation agreements to, in many ways to cushion as they left their time with the Green Bank. And this is an issue that came up, and I would say, Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything, but we in some ways would agree to disagree with the auditor and their finding here.
Yeah, so the auditor was focusing in on 3 severance agreements specifically. So you all recall that as a result of the sweeps, we initiated a number of different severances to help transition the staff, given our policy on severances and our bylaws. 2 of the positions, one was a director of human resources, we asked to stay on for 6 months to help us navigate through the transition and all the change that we were going through. So the severance actually included a date and specific requirements of what she would be responsible for doing over the course of that 6 months. And then the other severance agreement regarded a director of our incentive programs who we extended the severance start date a year after. Again, specifically laying out the roles and responsibilities of what that individual would be doing. In fact, that individual is still a consultant. He plays a major role in terms of us, Dale Hedman, in terms of us ensuring that we're able to monetize our renewable energy credits through the RCIP. So they questioned why we were giving a severance agreement and not immediately eliminating those positions. So we expressed in our management opinion that we needed those people on for periods of time to help us navigate through the transition. And then the third one had to do with somebody who was severed, but then brought back later on. We last year approved of several durational positions for the RCIP because we have heavy volume. So we went out to the market for an open position. This person reapplied and was hired as a hire. Obviously, the individual knows the current programs and how they work, so it was very easy to plug them right in. So we just had to simply respond to their findings and give a rationale as to why we believed it was necessary to treat those individuals that way.
Can I ask you a couple questions on this? So the first 2, that there was the separation agreements, I just want to make sure that I understand completely what happened. These positions were to be eliminated, but they were to be eliminated at a future date pending the completion of certain projects that these 2 employees who both were in the human resources area, it sounds like, needed to complete. Is that correct?
One was in the human resources area,
Okay.
and one was in the program area, but other than perfect.
Okay, I understand. Sorry, the second one I was unclear of. Okay, so those 2 severance agreements or separation agreements were signed and included some provisions that this severance agreement or separation agreement will take place at the end of this 6-month, 9-month, whatever the period was, and if you complete these items.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
And then, so these 2 people stayed, they completed those items, then they left, and separation payments started upon them leaving the organization.
That's correct. Yeah.
And the auditor's issue with this was what? Because I've actually seen this in business previously. I'm not saying it's happens a lot, but with trusted employees who've been around quite some time, working on critical projects, it's kind of show of respect to those employees that, you know, we understand you're going away, particularly somebody in the human resources space that has access to confidential information anyway. So I don't understand what the auditor's concern was here.
Yeah, I think where coming from was if you're going to do a separation agreement, then you should do it immediately or be consistent with everybody else as you do it. From a practical business management perspective, there are reasons why we did it the way we did. They wanted a black or white, and we were like, well, it's not black or white, it's actually gray, and it makes us better by handling it this way and being very specific about what we need those individuals for. So yes, to the point you're absolutely, some individuals who've worked for the state for probably 25 years, maybe 30 years in total between them, but they also played a critical role in terms of helping us navigate through that pretty torturous period.
Yeah, go ahead.
So to Tom's point though, so was the auditor saying this is sort of a best practices, or is there some provision we violated, some requirement.
They were almost in some ways making the argument that they were returning to their prior position less than 2 years after it was eliminated. But the reality was they were finishing up deliverables in their prior position before the position was being eliminated. I think part of the problem is I think the auditors very much look at the severance and separation agreements in the eyes of almost like comparing our employees to like state employees, and we're not. Our employees are at will, and yeah, this is where we kind of get to that agree to disagree, because we needed them to do certain deliverables during that time. You know, they had a certain period of time to do them and provide additional support and guidance to the organization, which was very much valued. And there was a time end period where that ended, and they were going to receive their severance agreement, and then we were going to move on.
Brian, I look at it a little differently, right? I look at it and say, in the case of the first two, it was a smart management decision to make sure that you treated the employee fairly, as well as protected the organization and made sure key functions were covered, transitioned, and in certain instances completed before you gave the separation agreement. So in those two, I'd say kind of kudos. In the third one, we looked kind of silly, right? We terminated somebody. It looked like we didn't realize what they were responsible for. And then upon further reflection, after paying them out a separation agreement, we brought them back. So from a managerial perspective, we look silly on that one. I'd say we're kind of 2 for 3 is kind of the way I'd put it.
I think that's fair, Tom. Yeah.
And just one question about the third one. I agree with that. The third one is sort of a different category, but it didn't seem like there was any separation of service for the first two until they were actually separated. But
Right.
With regard to the third one, just out of curiosity, how does, when they come back as a contract, I assume that's a time limited contract consultant, do we have to pay whatever the state into the state fund for benefits for that type of contract? In other words, is there a cost savings for us? Just out of curiosity.
No, there's no cost savings. We do have to pay that same overhead for the duration.
All right. Okay.
All right, and then lastly, this one was, with the severance agreements, we obviously had a fair amount of pushback with the APA. With this one, I believe this was something that needed to be remedied and addressed, and has been addressed since the audit. Relates to the fact that there was we share Connecticut Innovations, or we have some shared services still with Chris Baisden, who is their head of HR, and there were times when multiple times where he was got into the routine of approving timesheets during the fiscal years 2018 and 2019, where he was not the supervisor, and wasn't working in the same building. Obviously, it was 2 buildings over, but obviously Green Bank supervisors should probably be approving employee timesheets each period, not our shared service HR provider. And there should be obviously an appropriate designee within our organization to approve an employee's attendance who's closer to the situation. So this one has also been rectified. I don't know, Eric, if you want to give a little bit more additional color to this one also.
Yeah, Chris was more as a backstop for managers here, and generally was approving timesheets in coordination with managers. This is something that's been going on for quite some time and has never been an issue with the APA before, but we recognize the recommendation. He and I have since put in some new procedures where effectively I've become the backstop, and he's my double check, and that anything else now gets approved in-house and will be approved by CGB as opposed to Chris over at CI. So
that doesn't, it's Tom, my apologies for jumping in. So I understand that you can be the backstop and you can approve it, but what's the process to make sure the actual hours are worked? I mean, the fact that we're not sending outside to somebody who doesn't have the information, but we're keeping it inside to somebody who also might not have the information doesn't give me the warm and fuzzies. Like, how do we know these people actually work?
I do everything in my power possible to actually avoid approving anything myself, and kicking back to the managers and reminding them that they need to be approving these before deadlines.
So what happens if they don't? Like, what is our recourse?
Our recourse is I will go through and look at calendars. I'll follow up with the employee. I'll follow up with the team if I need to approve something myself.
So Eric, does this happen a lot?
That I actually have to approve something myself? No. It happens a fair amount that I need to remind people, but it doesn't happen very much that I have to go in and click the button myself.
So is it always the same manager who's not approving my experience being in exactly the same position as you is there's habitual offenders that aren't keeping up with the process of doing this. Is that what's going on here?
It's not that. It's usually the result of somebody going in and making an adjustment to their time, or it's one of the things that the state has done during COVID-19 is they've required special coding of telecommuting. And so we have to go in and make sure the appropriate tags get put in, and we have some members of staff who can't keep track of what exactly the code is. So I know their managers are always saying it's not COV 19, it's TCC 19. Go back and update it. And sometimes that change doesn't get updated. So it's minor things like that I see most often, as opposed to something that's wholly unapproved.
Yeah. What I've done in the past, and I'm not saying I know it's state of Connecticut different, right? What I've done in the past is simply say, hey, if you don't have an approved timesheet, you don't get paid. You'd be surprised how quickly the timesheet process gets cleaned up when you start doing that. Is making sure, because that's the paperwork to get somebody paid, and if you don't have it approved appropriately, you don't have an approved way to pay them. Don't pay them until such time as it's approved.
Good point. We will try that if needed.
Yeah, I don't have any. I've been in your shoes, and I just that's not fair to you, quite frankly. It's not fair to anybody to put you guys in that position, because it's just wasting your time chasing things down when somebody should be kind of doing their job, you know.
I agree with that, and I do have like one habitual offender I can point to it within my group, and I'm at the point now where I'm like, and he's amazing in he or she is amazing in every way, but it's one of those things where I like carrots, but sometimes a stick approach could potentially. I don't know if we could legally do that. I would be supportive.
Yeah, it's just and again, mistakes happen, and once, you know, a couple of times, whatever. It's just the repeat and the constant is just, you're not going to fix it until you get a little bit tougher. You know what I mean?
But I will say, overall on the audit report, with these three findings, we've definitely had years where there's been 4, 5, 6 findings. You find yourself on the cover of the Hartford Business Journal. You know, they're always going to have some findings, and I think 2 of these 3 findings in particular were areas for improvement for us. The third one related to severance agreements, I think we would, you know, we push back as much as we can. At the end of the day, there's only so far you could push back on your auditors. It's, you know, you don't want to, you know, ruin the relationship, and so there's a little bit of kind of a healthy back and forth that goes on there. But you know, we've implemented processes to address the time reporting issue and to address the first issue also with the reporting. So we are. And hopefully we're not in a position where the severance agreement issue comes up anytime soon.
Brian, could I just 2 comments on this topic? One is, could you at some point send us all a copy of, if you haven't already, the APA report? I just, you know, it's sometimes good to see their findings, although I think you covered it pretty thoroughly. But I think we, you know, we should all have a copy of it, given we're on the committee.
Thank you.
Definitely. I'll maybe reply all to the meeting. I know, I think Eric or Brian might have sent it just to you and Lonnie like over a month ago. But let me send it to the whole ACG committee membership so they have it. That makes more sense.
I thought so. One of the things that's always frustrating is it always feels like the audit is covering a time period that's so long ago. But so I think because I think I may have seen this, which leads to my next comment, which I may be conflating audit reports, but I do feel like this timely reporting to the legislature has come up in other audits. And I know it's just, it's exhausting because I know you made a spreadsheet and there's a dozen different things we have to report, but it is one of those things that is in our control. So I'm glad to hear we're on track this year. It would be great maybe to set a goal for ourselves to finish the second half or finish the first half of next fiscal year, the same way, to really make this a focus, just so it doesn't show up. It's just one of those nagging things. I know for the most part, the legislature, no offense, Lonnie, nobody there probably reads some of those reports, but it is our obligation. It'd be good to keep our sheet clean if we
They
can.
show up on unusual days and in unusual ways. So it's really important to keep it. I would say we put out platinum products from CGB, so it's good to keep that reputation.
Yeah, and I think we really organized it. The calendar that I don't know who put it together is really helpful. So hopefully we can just stay on track.
Okay. We definitely will, and there's no need, I agree, for self-inflicted wounds. So we'll try to maintain that 100% compliance with the reporting in particular.
Yeah, great. Okay, any other comments on this item, or there's nothing to vote on here? So if not, we can move on to item number 5, which is I'll pause. Did anyone have any other comments on it?
Matt, the only other thing I would say, first of all, everyone, thank you for the hard work and effort on that. I would agree that having these, I'd really call them 2 items. Quite frankly, I agree with your synopsis of the severance or the separation agreements, but I think that's fine work. So thank you for that. The only thing I was at is on a follow-up note, when we have our next one of these meetings, I think it'd be appropriate to know whether we're still hitting the dates on the quarterly. And if we don't hit the dates, I think we should be alerted as to, not hitting them and why, just to stay on top of this issue. That's the only comment I'd make.
Yep. I would agree with that, and I would just, but I would add in a good way that we've started to include something Matt Ranelli has been asking us to do for some time now, is include that reporting documentation as a slide or as a document in every ACG mailing. So we'll always have that, and we'll make a point that if there is any time amiss, we'll make sure to include the rationale and the reasoning for why it happened, and hopefully we don't have to do that.
That's perfect.
All right, great. Thanks everybody. The next item is I think Eric is going to take us through a proposed modification to the tuition reimbursement policy in the employee handbook.
Thank you, Matt. So what we're proposing here is a bit of a rejig to our existing tuition reimbursement policy, into evolving it into an educational assistance policy. This is something that we have offered since I've been around, and I think going back since the start of the organization. We've reimbursed staff for pursuing the education outside of work. What we're doing here is proposing to expand this program to take advantage of provisions offered in the CARES Act. It would allow employers to contribute to to employees' student debt obligations without any tax implications for the green bank or for the employee. The expanded program would allow for people to both pursue degrees as well as retire some of their debt that they acquired when pursuing degrees that helped them get hired here in the first place. The use of this federal policy allows green bank compensation dollars to go further, because you're effectively able to give somebody additional compensation without having to pay either payroll taxes on it or the employee having to pay income taxes on that. And this is all in the name of employee retention. As we're seeing a lot of competition from the private sector, this allows us to be more competitive. So this benefit would be limited at, according to IRS guidelines, at $5,260 per year. Right now, we have a $10,000 a year limit on tuition reimbursement. So if somebody did pursue the student loan reimbursement, this would be 52% of that for the year. We really think this will make a big difference to staff across the organization. And I would like to mention that we did take this to B&O, being that it is, or the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee, because this is somewhat compensation related, and they're also recommending that we bring this to the board. So,
Eric, what did budget and compensation, did they meet last week? What was
they met and they passed a resolution recommending this to the board.
Okay. All right, well, comments, discussion?
Yeah, it's Tom again. First question, what is our retention rate presently, and what kind of, what are we having in terms of turnover percentage right now?
So I don't have a turnover percentage calculated right now, but it's been fairly high. Sorry, it hasn't been very high for the past couple of years. We have seen.
What does that mean? Is it 10%, 15%, 20%?
It's been under 10.
Percentage?
It's been under 10%.
Okay, so it's been under 10%. Next question: how many people on staff currently take part in this program that we presently have?
So we had for this fiscal year, I don't believe we have anyone taking advantage of the tuition reimbursement. There may be one. I need to double check. For last fiscal year, we had 5.
And they finished out. Did they move on? What happened?
So everyone has either finished their degrees or the program that they were pursuing that were previously involved in this.
What do you mean? I don't understand the last comment.
No, so anybody that had been taking advantage of this in 2 years ago when I did the report on it, the fiscal year 2020, they've completed their degrees. The majority were pursuing a certificate program at Yale in clean energy financing. We had 2 doing MBAs, and both of those completed their MBA.
Thank you. The other item is this doesn't add anything to our cost. This just allows them to pay off prior debt, correct? So when I say it doesn't add anything to our cost, we're staying at that $10,000 a year limit for each person, correct?
Right. So if somebody is pursuing a current degree and they want to use some of this towards paying off the debt, they would still be capped at $10,000.
Okay. So the next question I would have is do the requirement, I'm not familiar with the specifics of the program, so my apologies. Is the degree have to be quote unquote approved and something that's relevant to their job function as opposed to something that they're interested in pursuing independent of their specific job responsibilities?
It has to be approved, and that would be taken into account as part of that approval.
Is there a written policy on that?
There is a written policy. I'm just looking for that language right now. It is continuing his or her education in a job-related area, in an area that will assist the employee in upward mobility and promotion opportunities. Is the current phrase on that.
That's really kind of, you can drive a truck through that, to be honest. I mean, who has to approve this? Is this Brian Garcia? Do you have to approve it? Who actually approves this?
It comes through me for the entire organization.
Okay, that seems to me, that just seems very broad. I mean, upward mobility, you know, I'm an engineer, I want to be general counsel, so I'm going to pursue a law degree, right? I mean, that's just, you know, sorry, Brian Farnan, no, you know, they're not coming after your job, or maybe they are. The other thing I'd question is how many of these people actually stay? Do we have any metrics? So we've had a program in place for a number of years. Do we know that we've paid for, you know, 25 degrees and 22 people have stayed 4 or 5 years and the others have moved along? I mean, what do we know on that?
I only know of one departure since I've been here in the past 5 years of somebody who pursued a degree that we were paying for that left the degree or left the organization after the degree was complete.
Right. Right. See, I guess what I'd love to see kind of a more fulsome presentation of kind of what this policy is overall, what we've seen from this policy kind of is, how many people have gone through it, some of the metrics surrounding the overall tuition reimbursement. I'm not against using it to pay off, the debt like this, but it doesn't seem. I can see our expenses going up because somebody who's got student debt is going to come and say, oh, wow, you mean you guys will pay for the degree that I already have? Okay. Why wouldn't you put in for that? But I don't know what that does to benefit the organization at this point. If you were to tell me that we've got a 25% turnover rate a year, and this can bring it down to under 10, that's fine. But if you're telling me that it's under 10 already, okay, so why am I doing this? If we don't have a problem, why am I trying to solve a problem that we don't have?
I think we're trying to prevent a problem.
Well, okay, but we can all do that. I mean, that doesn't prevent a problem. Why? I mean, we can't prevent all our problems.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think I agree with a lot of what Tom's saying. I don't really see the case for this, although I'm open to hearing more about it. According to the memo, only 25% of the staff have outstanding loans, so this benefit would not really necessarily be available to 75% of the staff. B, I think, again, I like our staff and the support, and don't want this to sound like we shouldn't encourage them. But
right.
these are education benefits they've already gotten, which frankly were mostly part of their hiring process already. And the purpose of the policy was really to keep skills more current, I think, and to get additional training beyond what was the training that made them qualified for the job in the first place. So I would be a little concerned about that. And what about the 75% of the folks who don't have it or recently paid it off? That may create some mixed feelings among that part of the staff. I think it's great that this provision exists in the tax code, but I'm not sure. It seems like a major deviation. One specific question, though, Eric, is in terms of the benefit can be up to $5,000 per year. Right now you have people going through, I guess, if they go to graduate school, they get paid based on or get reimbursed based on a maximum per credit, not their overall bill, right?
Right.
So, for example, someone working full time might work on a MBA and get a couple credits a semester, but they're probably not a full-time student. So I'd be curious to know what the average payout was, because my guess is if we adopted this policy, people who were not working when they accumulated however many credits it took for an undergraduate degree would really be coming in for bigger numbers than people who are working full-time, getting a credit or two at a time.
That's very fair.
So,
yeah.
I am happy to go back and calculate what that average is. I can tell you that most of our staff maxes out on the 10,000 per year.
So like that, you said it was the certificate program at Yale. How many credits?
So the certificate program at Yale, it ends up being about $9,700. We've worked with Yale to get scholarships to get that below the $10,000 mark, but I think the sticker price is around $1,100 for that, or 10,000 and change. So that's
how many credits is that?
I'd have to go back and double check.
Aren't we capped at $750 per credit?
Yes, we are capped at $750 per credit. But I don't know the exact number of credits. So.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking. Is that over the course of 1 year?
It's generally over the course of 2 fiscal years, but 1 year. academically.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see, but I guess I'm just skeptical, and I would also, if we're gonna get more information, I'd like to know what other state agencies are doing. I mean, you know,
So,
and also if we've given someone credit, for example, if you come in and you have a graduate degree, master's degree, and you got experiential credit, and so your salary was higher, should we really be then going back and paying additional money if we've already given them a bump in salary to reflect the master's degree? I mean, again, I'm not against the idea, but I just think that, you know, we open up a whole can of worms about equity and, you know, whether they've already been compensated, and I think open ourselves up for criticism if it's not what other state agencies are doing.
Well, this is Brian. I would just add that all fair points, and I would say that it's the fact that you still have the $10,000 cap, so you have the two buckets that the employees can get to. I hopefully will address some of the level of like equity. So like, okay, if you don't have the student debt, you at least have this opportunity to take on additional classes. And to me, the real benefit of it is the fact that, you know, we could potentially spend $4,000 or $5,000 to an employee that we want to keep, and that's going to have an impact on them of $8,000 to $9,000. So it's really about just using the federal code to stretch the incentives that we could provide to keep people as the job market heats up.
Yeah, but you're only providing that to the people that have already incurred the debt, to which you haven't demonstrated that there's a problem in losing those people right now.
Yep.
And it still doesn't address the equity issue that Matt's talking about, which is the fact that presumably you're paying that person already based on their experience and their degree, so they're getting paid on the benefit, they're getting the economic benefit of having the degree, and then you're saying not only are we going to give you the economic benefit of having the degree, we're going to pay for your getting that degree, and
So,
not everybody gets that.
So would you, go ahead, Michael, sorry.
So let me just say this, as a person that works for a state agency that has hired about 10 people over the last year, it is impossible to hire qualified staff at state compensation. And so I would say two things. One is, if you have a problem on retention, you've already lost. It's too hard to come back from that. So, I mean, I think that was the one reason, like a main reason why I supported this proposal on the audit, sorry, I'm blanking on the other committee. So, you know, like, yeah, so I guess I just wouldn't get us to the point of like, we have a problem on retention and then we're going to try and dig ourselves out of that hole. Which isn't to say that I don't agree with a lot of the points that have been made here. Those are certainly issues, right, that I think are fair to make. And then I think my only other point is, I think if, you know, there's not a will in this committee to sort of move forward with this, I think an alternative to consider would be to swap salary, to give employees the opportunity to swap salary for loan tuition reimbursement, right? Because then there's no additional financial impact to the Green Bank, but there's actually a financial benefit to the Green Bank and to the employee because you don't have to deal with the tax implications of that $5,000. So that's just another alternative.
But I think there's actually a tax issue with you. As my reading of the CARES Act around this, which I think it's explicitly prohibits swapping salary for this benefit.
Yeah,
that's correct, Eric.
And to the point, and Michael, to the point, I don't have any metrics to know whether we're having problems hiring, nor do I have any metrics to know whether we're losing. Retention is an issue. I'm anecdotally, we're told that retention issues are under 10%, which, you know, Merry Christmas, that's every organization. But in terms of the hiring, no one has said to me that it's taking us 9 to 12 months. Now, maybe it is. Maybe it is a problem and I'm just not aware of it. I don't know. That case has not been made that we're having problems hiring right now. To which point your idea of maybe in our hiring of somebody, maybe when, you know, you're onboarding them, maybe your elegant proposal, if it's set up that way from the outset, maybe it gets around the CARES Act issues, and maybe that's an appropriate way to go. I just don't have enough information.
Would it make sense, I'll propose this to the ACG members, with the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee recommending approval to the full board and now this coming to ACG, would it make sense to basically, I mean, our options are a few. We could basically, next board meeting, not raise it at all. We could, because there's the BOC, raise it with the approval from the BOC, but say the ACG had these additional concerns, and then it's incumbent upon us as staff to see if we could bring those concerns, address those concerns regarding retention and other things as part of the presentation to the full board with the feedback we received today, open to other alternatives. We're just throwing that out. So
Well, Brian, just one more comment, and then I'll address your questions. The other thing would be nice to know, and I don't know if this is a factor. I keep reading about, because I have college age kids who have student loans, about this sort of federal loan forgiveness. And I just wonder if we should keep an eye on that as well. If these same employees are going to get their loans forgiven, then we will have spent our money paying the loan and they would have gotten them forgiven potentially otherwise. So just something I'm not up to speed on, but I don't know if, it might bear looking at what's the likelihood of a federal loan forgiveness program.
Tom and I are still hoping for the Republicans to win back one branch of government so we can stop that.
Maybe, I don't know. But as to what we can do, I'd be open, Lonnie, Michael, and Tom, to what you think. My thought is I'm not ready to recommend it. I'd be open to moving it on without a recommendation. And just say, came here, we discussed it, concerns were raised, but no recommendation to the board, or any other variation. Maybe let's hear from the other members of what they would be comfortable doing with this item, starting with the proposed resolution all the way on down to other alternatives.
This is Lonnie. I think, revisiting it is a better idea than presenting it to the board with one key committee having serious questions. And, we know how that plays out in the full board meeting. So I think let's make it ready for prime time before we take it to the board.
I agree with Lonnie on that.
So would the board members be open to potentially having another ACG meeting with us to present further on this? Would that be, and we could do it before the next board meeting. It doesn't have to happen, I think, before the next board meeting, but we could potentially do that, or at some point in the summer. What would your preference be?
Sorry, go ahead.
I would say another board meeting is a good idea. I will leave it to Eric, maybe in the first instance, of how much time he thinks it would take to pull together an answer or a presentation on some of the issues raised. Maybe what Eric could do is, after the meeting, summarize, the sort of, or just list the questions that he has from us and circulate it, and we can add to them, or if there are other items, that way he has some guidance on what type of questions we want answers to. And then you can tell us how long it would take to get a response, get it to us with some time to look at it, and then have a meeting date, whatever, a week after that.
Perfect.
Okay, if that works for the ACG members, we'll take that as the direction for staff. We're happy to.
Sure. You know how I love special meetings. Absolutely.
All right, perfect. All right, thank you all. So from there, we'll move on to agenda item 6.
All right. Why don't we, let's see, is that Eric? I think that's you as well. This is the methodology to assess equity, impact, and reach to vulnerable communities.
Yep. So next slide, if somebody can advance me. So as the committee is aware, we have established impact methodologies through our evaluation framework that we use to describe our impact in a various array of areas. So ranging from economy, we talk about our investment numbers, our job creation, our tax revenue generation, to environmental impacts through emission avoidances and public health impacts of those, to actually the energy we generate. And what we're proposing here is how do we talk about the equity inclusivity of our actions, but it's a little bit more than that. It's how do we come into line with what the rest of the state is already doing. So last year in a special fall session, the legislature passed Public Act 20-5, which was related to addressing the utilities responses during some of the recent storms last year. And in that act, they developed a definition of vulnerable communities. And these are generally communities that are harder hit by the impacts of severe weather, that they want to make sure that the utilities, the EDCs, are serving. So through this definition, it basically defines vulnerable community as one that is of low to moderate income, one that is eligible for investment through the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977, and environmental justice communities, which are also defined in the Act, or anything else determined by DEEP. So to bring ourselves in line with that, when we updated our comprehensive plan through Budget and Operations Committee in January, we set aside our own targets for how we would have an impact in these communities, but we now are left to the point of how do we develop a methodology to assess that. And what we're basically proposing is we're going to use the statutory definition to define how we're actually impacting these communities. So how many projects, how much investment, how much capacity is installed in these locations. And so it's a rather straightforward, but it's just basically to codify this is what we're doing here, and this is to show that we are not just focused on part of the state, but we are focused on the communities that do need that investment the most.
Well, I'll start. I know we're going to bump up against our time, so we have 11 minutes, and so I'll just put my 2 comments out there, and then everyone else can comment. Again, this is great. We do such a good job on this. I'm always proud of the work. My 2 comments are: one, the definition of vulnerable communities. I think we should modify what was passed in 20-5 to just delete the last part about or as further defined by DEEP. Nothing is wrong with that, but I'm always leery about delegating something that we're using. I think if DEEP gets around to identifying other communities, we can wrap them in, but it always is just my pet peeve from the legislature about delegating to other agencies. And I don't feel strongly about it, but that's one thought. And then 2, I think this is great and we're doing what we can do, but I guess just one question is in drilling down, I mean, we kind of use these census tract numbers and that's good. I think that's fair. That's what most people do, but do we really know, do we keep track of, and do we want to think about keeping track of it, looking inside, like auditing one of those census tracts to see whether our, the individuals participating within that census tract are low and moderate income? I mean, we use it as a proxy. Oh, you're in the census tract, but there are census tracts where there are portions of the tract that have people who don't meet the definition. I just wonder if we ever want to run an internal check to see, because go ahead.
I think that's a very interesting point and a very valid concern, and I think that's something that we could look at doing down the road. Does this proxy stand up to what we're actually hoping that it gets to?
Yeah, and it's practical, I know. So that's why I say we don't want to drill down in everyone, but it would be interesting to pick 1 or 2 and audit the numbers.
So
Certainly.
I'll just add that we had this exact same question that Matt is raising, and we looked into it, and I think a couple things I'll share is, one is that if you look at the census, the way it's laid out, these block group levels are designed to be homogeneous. So while there is certainly variation within it, I mean, the intent from the census is that they're homogeneous. And then the second one is, and I forget, we'll have to dig out where the study was, but we did find a study that did what Matt is suggesting, and it did find that, like, it was pretty accurate. So I can't remember. Let me try and figure out where that study is. But yeah, because we had very similar questions to Matt.
Cool.
Other comments, questions?
No, I'm good. I think your comments, particularly the deep one, are very valid.
All right. Well, so this item has a resolution for us, which ends with us recommending that the Board of Directors approve this methodology. So I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay.
Seconded.
Great. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none. Resolution 3 is adopted. We have a couple of minutes, so why don't we keep moving? I know Matt McCunis always gets shortchanged, so let's hear from him on the legislative update. Matt, are you on mute?
Brian, I think this is going to be.
Yeah.
I don't see Matt.
Yeah, let me jump in and I'll handle this one actually.
Okay, Matt.
So obviously we're getting close to the end of the session. The big items from a legislative perspective are the expansion of the Green Bank's mission to be beyond just clean energy to handle things like resiliency. That is moving forward. One of the big victories early on in session were having the Green Bank scope included in the governor's climate adaptation bill. And anytime that you're part of the governor's legislation, that's usually a good thing. It's funny because the governor's bills often get passed very much at the end of session. I feel like the legislature often holds them hostage in some ways, but then they do typically, barring unique circumstances, do get passed. So we are cautiously optimistic there. As for our CPACE and resiliency and EV charging legislation for some minor tweaks there, that's moving forward. Feeling good about that. Quasi-agency oversight. This is a continuing issue that we have, as well as other quasis, where we're trying to get the balance between, as us being a quasi-public, to be able to work at the speed of business to accomplish public good, but at the same time having the proper oversight. So we're working with the governor's office and the other quasis to find a compromise there. Another issue that we are in some ways letting industry lead, but it does impact us very much, is this issue of the property tax exemption for residential solar PV systems. Right now there is litigation with a small handful of towns who are revoking that exemption for third-party owned systems, and those third-party owned systems make up anywhere between 70 to 80% of the market. So it really will have a negative impact on residential solar deployment. And we have been involved in that litigation ourselves because one of our earliest solar funds included residential solar systems as part of that package. We're happy to report that we're down to less than 10 towns that we are that are still involved in litigation with us, and we're hoping to wrap that up soon. There's just a few towns that are really dug in their heels, and so we don't want to reward what we think is kind of a bad policy decision on their part, which is, in our opinion, in conflict with the clear language of the law. Other than that, it's been a busy session. I'll actually jump in because we don't have that much time. The next area where policy is becoming even more and more important is on the regulatory front. Our new chairperson for PURA, Melissa Gillette, is really using her role as chairperson of PURA to push policy in ways that are really impactful for clean energy deployment. And you can see just from this laundry list of regulatory activity that we are playing a front and central role in, moving clean energy policy in a positive way with the clear focus that we want to encourage, the private sector. So we're using the least amount of ratepayer dollars to get the biggest bang for their buck. And at the same time, we look to underserved communities and equity as ways that we could do better than we have in the past. So those are some of our guiding principles. With that, I'm gonna, with with time running out, I'm going to quickly also
Brian,
go over
this
to
is
our
Lonnie. Brian, I
Yes.
just wanted to ask you one question. So I'm just getting a lot of phone calls about 6441, because in the municipal stormwater section, it has that real estate conveyance tax or levy, I guess as we call it. And to Matt's point earlier of how this stuff comes to bite you in the butt when you're getting ready to present a bill like that. I mean, that's suddenly a talker.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, do you have any backup vehicles for our section of that, our infrastructure section, like on the storage bill, which seems to be going well, or even the virtual net metering bill, because that, I know every municipality wants that cap raised. And so I'm just wondering if there's a backup vehicle waiting.
We've, it's funny because on the property tax exemption bill, which is less important to us, we do have a vehicle for that. When it comes to the CGB scope, we currently do not have a vehicle for that, but that is something that I'm going to talk to Matt today about. And we're hoping that our level of concern in that was very high. After talking to OPM, the governor's office, we felt a little bit more comfortable about the success of the bill, especially because that potential conveyance fee is optional for the towns, so they do not have to implement that. So we're hoping that will give some level of kind of like, this doesn't need to be a talker. This will be a partisan bill at the end of the day because of that conveyance fee component of it. But we do still feel somewhat cautiously optimistic about its passage. But I will be talking to Matt today about potential other alternative vehicles for it.
Great, thank you.
Brian, you want to try and hit the last two in a minute and a half?
Yes, super quick. So most importantly, we talked about this with the APA report. Our statutory reports have all been on time. And we'll continue to include a slide like this, as Tom mentioned. And then the last issue, which I would say is importance, of vital importance, is board membership. So two individuals that have been vital to the success of the Green Bank, Eric Brown from the CBIA and Matt Ranelli from Shipman and Goodwin. We're likely going to lose the two of them at some point this year. Matt's been great. I think you've been telling it's like a bad relationship, Matt. Like for like 2 years, you're like, it's time for me to get off. You're like, just give us one more, just stay with us. And but I do think we finally are sadly are going to lose you at some point through this year. I do feel like, we have been in contact, we've been in communications with Senator Looney's office with some very viable names. Matt's been great with the transition. We believe potentially we will be lucky enough to even have Tom Flynn take over as chairperson of ACG. Very much Matt and Tom, I think, are very similar in their approach and have a really strong understanding of organizational kind of structures, and can kind of dig in and ask those tough questions. And quite honestly, this is the committee where we want those tough questions and kind of harsh, look to be done. So we welcome that. And but we're in no hurry to rush you out the door, Matt. And then with Eric Brown, his time or his role at CBIA is evolving and changing. Where energy, he's not the. I think he's going to be not going to be the lead on that for CBIA. And because of that, we may potentially be losing him as a board member. We think in the near term we'll have him on so that we can have a smooth transition. Anything else, Brian, that you'd want to add on this slide?
No, you covered it right. That's great. Thanks, Brian. Matt,
Hey, can I add one thing?
Gonna suck to lose Matt, but yes.
Yeah, Matt, don't go.
I look at it as a good
I
relationship.
second that.
Yeah.
Keep them going, Diane.
Really,
Keep
we're
them going.
losing Eric, Matt. Not a guilt trip, but just saying.
And Matt, I think you and I are known as the Pains. So with you leaving, I'll be the only Pain left. So don't go.
You're probably right.
Honestly, though, it makes for a better organization. So continue being a Pain, because it makes for a much better organization, and we need that. I mean, it's an important role that an organization needs to have from board members who know their stuff. I would say in other ways if this wasn't being recorded, but it's very helpful and it makes us a better organization. So
no, I think it is. This is Lonnie again. I think it totally strengthens us that, and we're not a rubber stamp board. You know, we have pushback and we have expertise that's incredibly valuable and vital, and we really look at all these issues thoroughly and dive deep. So I think that's one of the selling points with the decision making that comes out of the Connecticut Green Bank.
Yeah, well, right. Well, thanks, Lonnie and Brian for recognizing. You know, I mean, no one is looking to be raising issues just for sport, but you know, it's an environment, and staff really cultivates this environment, starting with Brian Garcia on down. That you know, that kind of input is welcomed, and it's nice to hear that it is welcomed. And I will say, staff always rises to the occasion and provides the information that we're often asking for. And I know that comes at a lot of hard work, but I think we all are on the same page that we hope in the end it leads to a better product. So.
I couldn't agree more with Matt's comments. I think I've been on other boards where the follow-up is not what this management team gives you. So I think that you know, when you make comments in these meetings and things, that they're taken seriously and acted upon one way or another, and that's always appreciated. So.
All right. Okay. So I think that's good. You know, we have covered a lot of ground, and thanks for especially the update on the last. I think it's a good part of the meeting, but I want to be mindful of people's time, everyone. So unless there are other comments, and I'll pause if there are, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, hearing none, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
You too.